A bombing today at a hospital in southern Gaza killed 20 people, including 5 journalists, and Israel is calling it a, quote, tragic mishap. A freelance journalist for the Associated Press, 33-year-old Miriam Daga, was among those killed. She had been reporting on victims of child starvation. Her father led a funeral prayer for her in the city of Khan Yunis. Dozens of people were wounded in that strike on Nasser Hospital. Israeli military spokesman says that the military does not intend to target civilians in these attacks, adding that Hamas uses civilian infrastructure as shields.
Reporting from an active war zone carries immense risk, especially in a war with a terrorist organization such as Hamas, who cynically hides behind the civilian population.
Israeli media are reporting that troops were targeting an apparent surveillance camera on the roof of the hospital. The Israeli military says it is now investigating that strike.
Well, President Trump says that he may send National Guard troops to more U.S. cities, major cities, in fact. The president said Chicago could be next, calling the nation's third largest city crime-ridden, although violent crime rates are down significantly. He has deployed 2,000 troops to Washington, D.C., and it also suggested that New York, Baltimore, and Oakland could also see Guard troops in the streets. The governor of Illinois saying today that no one from the White House has reached out to state or city leaders.
What President Trump is doing is unprecedented and unwarranted. It is illegal. It is unconstitutional. It is un-American.
National Guard troops are typically deployed under orders of the state's governor. A judge is currently weighing whether the Trump administration violated federal law by sending troops to Los Angeles back in June. So let's talk more about the president's expansion of the National Guard with Hal Kempfer, former Marine intelligence officer and Homeland Security expert. Hal, thanks so much for taking the time. So as part of the president's executive order, these specialized units in the National Guard could be created. Who would make up these units, do you believe? What type of training would they receive, and what might their duties be?
Well, Heather, what we know so far is they're going to be like civil disturbance or civil, some sort of civil interface units. They would get special training in how to deal with, civil unrest, riots, protests, things like that, and any other variety of missions where they would be supporting civil authorities. Now, this is a traditional mission that the National Guard has done. There is precedence for this. If you go back to 9/11, we had the civil support teams. We have 2 of those in California. They're smaller units of less than 30, but they're highly trained, highly specialized, that look for all sorts of things tied to weapons of mass destruction or chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear type of things. They have those. And then we also have the Homeland Response Force, a larger organization that deals with larger response, supporting civil authorities. Whether it's CBRN, they've kind of moved into other areas as well. I think that's the model that he's looking at, or I should say Secretary of Defense Hegseth is looking at and setting up these specialized units.
Okay, so it sounds like, though, the National Guard already does have these reaction forces.
Well, what they do is they take regular units and they give them specialized training, and then they go out there and do stuff. So, for example, if there was an Olympics, and I would go back to the 2002 Olympics in Utah, they took regular National Guard units and they trained them up in civil disturbance and a few other things where they might be used to go in there. And they just rotated them in and out and did that specialized training. So that's not something that the Guard hasn't done. And by the way, the Guard has done stuff going back to the beginning of the Republic, if you will, working with civil authorities domestically. So it's not unprecedented. And if you recall, the Guard was used extensively in federal status during the civil rights era in order to basically enforce federal law in some of those southern states where the governors were opposed to doing things like integrating universities and schools and stuff. That the president actually federalized the National Guard and said, go in there and make this happen.
I hear you on the previous use of it, but some of these states that have been mentioned by President Trump, the governors are really upset because they say, we have not been consulted, and frankly, we don't want the National Guard here.
They are upset, very upset about it. But again, I would point out George Wallace in Alabama, he didn't want the National Guard federalized or sent to do what they did, but they were done anyway. So that has been done before. Of course, Usually when we think about civil support missions or defense support of civil authorities, we think about the normal process where the governor requests federal assistance, and then it goes into the Department of Defense, and then they figure out to send in a unit to go in there and a military unit to go in there and help them. That's the normal way for disasters like fires, earthquakes, floods, things like that. This obviously is a very different model. This is one where the federal government's coming in and imposing a force in there. It's not unprecedented. It is unusual that is done. But I would say during this Trump administration, that unusual has become kind of usual.
Yeah. Can we talk about the expense of deploying National Guard to a city? Any idea of the cost, and especially if these deployments are weeks?
Heather, that is the big question. As you know, I used to coordinate this here in California, military support for civil authorities. And that is what there's a law called the U.S. Economy Act, which is like a ticking clock. Yes, you can bring the military in, but they are almost always the most expensive thing you can send in to do something like this. So there's a clock ticking. It says you're supposed to find the most economic source of goods or services or whatever. Well, in this case, you can bring the Guard in, you can bring the military in, if you will, under federal status to provide support. But at some point, you need to bring them out because they are the most expensive thing. And there are other less expensive alternatives out there that can be used for whatever mission set it is. So yes, they are very expensive. I don't know if there's a fixed percentage, depends on what type of units, but it is always the most expensive option.
Okay, so when you're talking about other options, what might some of those be if you are President Trump, who is looking to really make cities safer?
Well, if you're the president, you have limits. The president can order federal law enforcement in. There are some things jurisdictionally they can do. For example, with the U.S. Marshal Service, they can make special deputy U.S. Marshals do a lot of things where they can actually do some enforcement level stuff on the street. Also, in making a number of these cartels and the gangs associated with cartels terrorist groups, it opened up a whole variety of enforcement where they can go after gangs and things like that they couldn't do before. And so, for example, you could have the FBI going into, do something, enforcement action against a, quote, terrorist group that is a violent gang, and they would be backed up by military that would be providing security to the federal law enforcement, but not actually enforcing the law, and that way avoiding things like violating the Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits federal military from doing that.
All right. Well, we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, the president signing that executive order just today. Really appreciate it as always, Hal. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Heather.